is this just another one of those things that people are like losing their minds for? Because everyone in the fitness industry has a tendency of like seeing a flashy new thing, and what are we doing here, buddy? Seeing a flashy new thing, and then kind of just going full tilt towards it, irrespective of whether or not it's actually works. So, what's your take?
So, to start off, I think we can do a little bit of an introduction on what intermittent fasting is for the viewers. And so intermittent fasting is, there's three different types, right? There's something called alternate day fasting, in which somebody restricts their calories to 25% of what they would typically take. And then on the second day, they would kind of eat as normal, right? And so they would flip-flop, and that's one type. There's something called once daily 24-hour fast, or once weekly, sorry, and that's just doing a fast. So you continue to drink water, but you eliminate all food consumption for a 24-hour period. And then there are other forms as well, like time-restricted feeding, which is essentially when...
That's what you had me do.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so time-restricted feeding is when you pick a window, let's say 18 hours you're going to fast, the other 6 hours you get to eat. So it's up to you when you want to put that into play, whether you want to fast through the morning or fast through the evening. But those are kind of the different types of intermittent fasting. And essentially people are doing this as a way certainly to lose weight, but where the research is concerned, it does seem to be quite effective for weight loss. It also seems to be beneficial in metabolic syndrome, or when you have high cholesterol, hypertension, that sort of thing. A fatty liver would be another indication. And in my opinion, I don't think it's a fad. I think it's something that has a lot of good research behind it, and I don't think it'll be going away. I mean, evolutionarily speaking, we've been doing intermittent fasting. The hunter-gatherers were doing intermittent fasting, and I think there's a lot of value to intermittent fasting, and not just the weight loss aspect or improving body composition, but I think it really gives people a sense they can really dig into their hunger cues, and so they can actually realize a lot of people comment that they were able to recognize true hunger a lot better, and so they get a lot more dialed in with their satiety or their satisfaction afterwards and that sort of thing. So I think it's a really good strategy. I think it should be medically supervised, and there are certain populations that shouldn't, or right. If they're going to do this, they should be definitely supervised. Like diabetics, that's one population in particular. I think that people should be careful with.
So if you're a diabetic and you want to lose weight and you're considering intermittent fasting, what are the special implications for them? Like you say it should be medically supervised, but yeah. What does that, first of all, what does that look like? And second of all, can you let us in behind the curtain a little bit on what that means for those people?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you're looking at a type 1 diabetic, you're looking at the risk of hypoglycemia. That's something that's very dangerous and can happen when someone who is diabetic decides to fast. Okay, so that's concern number one, and that's really is the biggest concern. But that being said, that doesn't mean that somebody with type 2 diabetes who's working with a practitioner or a dietitian or somebody who can kind of dial in and give them an individualized plan to make sure that that the program is working for them and is certainly not causing any risks, such as hypoglycemia. So that may mean maybe not starting with a 24-hour fast once weekly. That might be way too much for somebody like that. and that might look like having, maybe implementing time-restricted feeding, in which that person is starting off with, a pretty long feeding window, typically, and then shortening it as things go.
And so
that may not even be the best strategy for those people altogether. So
Right.
it really does take looking at the individual and seeing the therapeutic value of that and whether that's appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, why do you think intermittent fasting has taken off culturally?
I think there's a couple reasons. One of the reasons I think it's taken off is we're in this really fast-paced society, right? And so intermittent fasting will cater to some people in the fact that they actually have to do less, right? They don't have to do the whole, take all of Sunday and meal prep and that sort of thing and make sure every single meal's
That's
prepared.
why I love it, for sure.
Yeah, it's
I
the
like,
simplicity of it,
exactly.
right? It kind of suits our modern lifestyle in terms of, well, you got to run out the door, you don't have time to grab breakfast or that sort of thing, so you just don't eat.
Yeah.
Right? So I think simplicity is one factor. I definitely think that the research has demonstrated a lot of benefits for intermittent fasting, and so potentially people have caught on to that.
How old is this research? Because I feel like intermittent fasting is like what, 12 months since I've been hearing about it, maybe 18 months since I've been hearing about it, but even like it's super popular now.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of people are trying it, a lot of people are having success with it. And so like, is this research like what's your opinion of the research? Do you think it's long-term enough and viable enough, or do you think like there's still questions you have for it, or
I think there's some interesting questions that have come out of the research.
Mm-hmm.
And some people who look at the research, they may say, okay, well, typically when people are intermittent fasting, they're also inadvertently reducing their calories.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's why people are losing weight.
Right, so you're not necessarily saying there's some holy grail to the actual mechanics, but rather people are eating one less meal per day, so that's the essence of why it's working.
An unintended consequence of shortening the feeding windows, that people are actually under consuming their calories.
Mm-hmm.
But some of the studies have actually controlled for that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they show that despite people, sticking to their feeding window, they've taken two groups, and what they've done with one group is they've let them eat normally and at a certain amount of calories, and they take the same group and they make them fast. They still eat the same amount of calories as the second group.
Mm.
And what they see is that there's still benefits in terms of weight loss and certain metabolic parameters like insulin sensitivity and maybe inflammatory markers, depending on what study you look at. So I think there's an effect independent of just what happens when people inadvertently decrease their calories.
Is there anyone that you think intermittent fasting is just not for this person?
A couple of populations come to mind. Diabetics, type 1 diabetics, I think, as we talked about, needs to be really...
They need to be careful.
They need to be very careful. Also, people who have, chronically high stress levels. And this may be a bit of an oxymoron, because we just talked about how, that tends to lend itself to people wanting to do that who are high stressed and maybe don't have time to think about stuff. But just in terms of when you have chronically high stress levels, sometimes your cortisol levels can be high. And cortisol is what's known as a glucocorticoid. So it'll actually trigger the body to release more glucose. And so it can mess up insulin. And so if you're looking at somebody who's really high stressed, and then they put this additional stressor on the body, because not eating for long periods of time can be a physiologic stressor. That might be somebody who maybe at that time is probably not ready to do intermittent fasting, and maybe they need to do some more stress management, get their cortisol levels in check, and so that's one person or one category of people I think may not do as well with IF.
That's interesting. Heather, you and me were having a conversation the other day about what was the question? Something
Anxiety and exercise.
Anxiety and exercise, and who like exercise maybe isn't for. And so my answer to that question, I think actually like feeds well into this, because exercise requires an increase in cortisol, right, to produce the energy necessary to facilitate the workout. But so if someone's cortisol is already through the roof, or their adrenals are, burnt out and they're not producing enough cortisol, then like rigorous exercise, in my opinion, has been contraindicated. And so, but when you look at the cortisol health, and maybe you'll want to comment on this, to someone who's like very unhealthy and surplus 100 plus pounds to lose, let's say, and you just start like going full on Jillian Michaels, like Biggest Loser style ass kickings in the gym, then what do you think's going to happen to their adrenals, right? Like it's just like, it's going to be like going 12 rounds of Mayweather just to put them through those adrenals through a workout. And so what we had talked about,
that might cause more harm than good, right?
Yeah. And so what Heather and I talked about was, if the cause of your stress is your health, then I think that there is like the psychological stress piece of, hey, I went to the gym, yes, I sweated out, yes, I did this, actually is relieving in a sense. So the stress induced via the workout is perhaps offset by the stress reduction of saying, hey, I accomplished something that's in line with the standards I'm trying to have for myself. And thus, like, go nuts if that's where you're at, right? I think there's a
kind of a balancing effect.
Yeah, I think there's a responsible way to like facilitate that. But it kind of ties like into like what you're saying nicely, I think, here too.
Absolutely.
And just that idea that like, I think stressed out people just like, well, I think you'll agree with this, but they just have a different playbook, like for how they should approach dieting, for how they should approach like everything.
Yeah. In my experience, it's been more.
Yeah.
And more is not necessarily better, right?
Yeah.
For these kind of people, so.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. Well, and stressed out people are, like there's some sort of stresses that are like, what I call gravity stressors. They're like unavoidable stressors. So it could be like the passing of a loved one, or, what it's like to be a new mother, or, a young man who just broke up with his girlfriend, or, like these are stressors that like we're going to encounter, or many of us are going to encounter. And the reality is like there's no grandiose like life change that you need to make in those times and those seasons of life. You just need to like weather the season, right? Like winter comes to an end and spring starts happening, right? Like, so I think
you jogged my memory on one specific indication where you might want to be careful, and that's with intermittent fasting, people with eating disorders. Right? People with eating disorders need to be very, very careful that they don't fall into the to the potential trap that could be laid by intermittent fasting, right? Because it's an attractive strategy, and it probably lends well to their psychology at the time. So that's another population I would be very, very careful, and I probably wouldn't recommend.
So we have a policy for people who are stressed. We call it the good enough policy.
Right.
Where, again, it's not really a policy, but where if a stressed person, their cup is filled to the brim and they're about to like overflow, like, and they, get the end of a crazy day and they put their kid down, or they finish a 16-hour day at work and they go home and they're looking down the barrel of a tub of Haagen-Dazs.
Oh yeah.
Oh. And they're thinking, man, it's hog time right
now.
Hog time. And like maybe the Haagen-Dazs is what'll get the job done in terms of like feeling like you have some semblance of control over your stress levels. But if good enough is like, let's say, some crackers and summer sausage and cheese, then like
I love me some summer sausage.
Oh man,
I love me some summer sausage. Oh man, summer sausage. So good.
you can get away with like something like that has like a calorie load of like 500 or 600 calories, let's say, versus a 1200 calorie tub of Haagen-Dazs, then like that's a W for that person in that phase of life.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, but for the chronically stressed, I think there is like a deeper question of like, if this is the way you roll, then you need to take a big step back from your life when you can and say, how can I architect my life in a way that lends better to health? Because someone who's already, like, if you're out there and you're feeling like I'm already operating at a 9 out of 10 all the time, like, I don't think people who are operating at 9 out of 10 have room for the 3 out of 10 that it probably takes to truly manage your health, like, efficiently.
Yeah.
Right? And so
It's tough to slow down.
Exactly, right?
Yeah.
So, and some of those accelerators of your stress, like, are like they're not always what's surrounding you. They're not always those gravity stressors like, hey, I'm a new mom. Like, a lot of times it's like how you think.
Right.
Like I had a conversation with someone the other day who has OCD, and I have a tremendous amount of empathy for that. And this is someone who is like struggling with their weight, and like, even though like I think someone on the outside could look in our life and say, hey, this person isn't 10 out of 10 stressed, but there are some underlying things that create that stress for that person. And I think like that stress is super real to that person. And so like I think there's some tougher conversations, there's some deeper conversations that lead to like relieving yourself of that. And so like I don't know, I'm definitely climbing down the rabbit hole, but I do think that the opposite of that is people just try a bunch of diets, such as intermittent fasting. Although I think intermittent fasting is an exception. Let's say they try Atkins, or I don't know. Does anyone do Atkins anymore? Never mind. Let's say they try, I don't know, the all peanut butter diet. Have you seen that one?
No.
Yeah, it was a couple of years ago, but it was like only peanut butter.
Yeah, no, that one totally missed the radar for me.
Yeah, I did it. I gained 75 pounds of fat, and I couldn't be happier. Okay, so like I think the grander conversation is like around weight loss.
For sure.
So, okay.
Most people are getting into intermittent fasting for the weight loss benefits.
Okay. So, okay, hypothetical scenario, you are, it's unavoidable that you'll run into me on the street. You can't duck it. You've tried. I said, Andrew,
You're chasing me down.
I'm running you down. I get your attention. I say, hey, I've got 1 minute and I desperately need to lose weight. What do you say to me?
So in that 1 minute, while you're chasing me down and I'm screaming for my life,
Yeah.
I would
probably keep running so I get more cardio.
Yeah, if you were open to the idea of doing intermittent fasting, I'd say that might be a great strategy for you.
So that would be.
So I would say morning or evening, right? Pick 18 hours out of your day that you're not going to eat food, and for that 6 hours, sure, you can eat whatever you want. Ideally, you're also eating, fruits and vegetables and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how intermittent fasting is done right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's what I would suggest.
Okay.
Is that you try that on, and you give that 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow, that's crazy to me. That like the like you've spent a very large amount of time. You've spent a very large amount of time studying this stuff, and intermittent fasting gets it into your 1 minute sales pitch.
For sure.
That's cool.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would recommend other things like exercise, but if there was one thing you could do, I think that would be one of the most effective things you could do.
Given the nature of the whole nutrition industry, what's next? What do you think people really are going to start paying attention to more and more? Where do you think research is going to start taking us? What's next secularly, and what's next for Dr. Hubbard in terms of like what you think is in the pipeline that we all need to have our ears
For sure.
Ready for? Ears to the ground? Is that a thing? That's what I was going to say. Yeah, what we all need to have our ears to the ground about.
Yeah. I would say the microbiome and the impact of diet on the microbiome. So for those of you who don't know, the microbiome is the collection of bacteria, viruses, and parasites that live within you. And they control a lot of different aspects of metabolism, including how many calories you're extracting from your meals, influencing your things like your mood and your thoughts even, which is pretty incredible. But specifically, I think we're starting to see a lot more research on the impact of things called prebiotics. And prebiotics are things that selectively feed beneficial bacteria, or that selectively feed bacteria to give you a health benefit. And so prebiotics, we often typically think of these in foods that are high in fiber, although that's not necessarily the case. Things like you can find prebiotics in foods like onions, asparagus, garlic, and you know, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, you're going to say, oh wait, those are all the foods I can't do because they cause a lot of gas and bloating. And while that may be true, there are certain, I guess, supplements out there that are things like partially hydrolyzed guar gum, which is a prebiotic.
Greg.
And I think we're going to see a lot more research on the impact of food as food for bacteria and how that implicates itself in things like weight loss and chronic disease, for sure.
Yeah, we have a client, Mike, actually. Greg, if you could shut your pie hole for a second, please.
Also talk more like at the camera.
At the camera.
Just because you get quieter when you turn away.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we have a client, like collegiate ball player Mike, who's lost like. Greg, you're killing my vibes right now, man.
Come here, buddy.
I'll re-say that. Yeah, we have a client, Mike, who's a collegiate ball player. He's now lost like pretty much like close to 100 pounds, like,
Wow.
or like about 100 pounds.
That's incredible.
And he swears, he we put him on. He did his own homework on probiotics, and we commonly recommend like probiotics just because the research, like as you're saying, is becoming more and more convincing over time. But so yeah, the research is becoming more and more convincing over time.
There actually isn't a whole lot of research to support probiotics in weight loss. And I don't know whether that's a fact of the research is just not being done. I think there are some studies being done, but and so I think going back to the prebiotics, I think the prebiotics are going to be more important than the probiotics.
Really?
Right? Because the probiotics are like putting plants in your garden, right? Going to you know, Home Depot or wherever you buy your flowers and sticking them into your garden, right? But prebiotics are like the soil,
Yeah.
right? They're like the food that the plants will grow from, right? Probiotics are not going to stay. For the most part, the research has suggested that probiotics, they don't stay long term. They're like temporary travelers, you know, visiting a new economy, impacting that economy, and then leaving.
Well, even like with your analogy around a flower, like it's gonna die eventually.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you don't feed that the proper
don't feed
nutrients, it just dies.
Right.
And then you're returning to the store to get more flowers, planting them, and they die when you should be focusing on the soil quality.
Interesting.
Right.
The
So I think you're going to
soil
see
quality.
prebiotics emerge as a unique therapy for a lot of different metabolic conditions, even cardiovascular disease, because the microbiome is implicated in cardiovascular disease, fatty liver, neurodegeneration. So there's all these different, like you can't escape the effects of the gut bacteria on whole body health and disease.
Mm-hmm. That seems so crazy to me, that we are like completely reliant on other organisms that are not us in order to like be vital.
And the crazy thing is they outnumber us 10 to 1.
Like, what's the life cycle of a probiotic? I take a probiotic, goes in my stomach. How long is it there before it becomes a dead flower?
Anywhere from a week to 2 weeks.
Really?
Yeah.
So
with most strains.
So what's your opinion of people who are just pummeling probiotics right now?
So I do think there is, so probiotics, while they don't stay in your gut, they do a lot of stuff while they're in there, right? They communicate with the immune system and the digestive tract, because 80% of your immune system is located in the gut. And so probiotics, what they do is they go in, they may bind or kind of attach to the mucus layer in the gut, and they might prevent other pathogens from binding that up. So I use the analogy of a full parking lot, right?
Okay.
Versus a lot of empty spaces. So if you have a full parking lot that you're driving through, you got to keep on going to the next parking lot. And so if you picture yourself as the the harmful bacteria or virus or parasite, it has to keep going. It can't bind. So probiotics, in one respect, they prevent other things from attaching to the gut lining.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And another thing they do is they talk to the immune system. So they can talk to immune cells recognize them. It can dampen inflammation, which is why they can be very beneficial in ulcerative colitis.
Okay.
They can dampen something called visceral hypersensitivity, which is basically when somebody feels pain out of proportion to the stimulus. So you see that very commonly with irritable bowel syndrome, in terms of, they may be producing the same amount of gas as you are, but they're just feeling it way more. They're feeling that distension, they're feeling that pain. And so probiotics can impact the different immune cells that secrete things that irritate the nerves in the gut lining. And then, you've got the whole neurologic benefits to taking probiotics. And there's only a few strains that have actually been associated with those neurologic or those brain health benefits. I think that's really cool too, right? We've got this thing called our vagus nerve that travels from the brain to the gut, and probiotics can interact with the vagus nerve and can help with mood regulating chemicals, essentially.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool.
I think people need to hear this stuff too, because what it does for me is it adds a layer of context to like how to approach supplementation. Like even if we put probiotics aside and we talk about any supplement and the potential efficacy of it, like I think when you understand fully this stuff, like, because what you were saying about you could have two GI environments that are side by side that are nearly identical, but the person with IBS as something that is affecting their like pain symptoms, right? Like, so you have someone with amplified pain symptoms and someone with a nearly identical GI environment, but just doesn't have the amplified pain symptoms.
Yep.
And then this guy is saying, I'm healthy, nothing's wrong with me, whatever, my blood work's fine, my doctor says I'm healthy, it's all good. And that's like certainly a partial truth. And then you have this guy that says, I'm unhealthy, I have this issue, I have whatever. And whereas the distance between them is not necessarily that far, potentially, right? And so, but psychologically, we have two very different urgencies and very different opennesses towards the spectrum of medical interventions, right? Or non-medical interventions, right? So, such as exercise or like whatever. So, I think that's that's an interesting thing for people to hear, and I think I think if I'm a 50 to 60 year old and I'm thinking about my like retirement, and when I'm like, this is another thing, I'm going to go on a bit of a side rant here. People have financial planners. Makes sense, right? Like, you don't want to run out of money, and so you plan for your finances. And if you are that, 50 to 60, you're thinking about this. You're thinking about it a lot. You're thinking about, am I behind? Am I ahead? Am I whatever? But either way, you're creating some idea, whether it be a healthy one or a fearful one, around what your life is going to look like in retirement, if you're even going to choose retirement.
I think I know where you're going with this.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I had this conversation with my mother the other day. I'm like it, and I don't want to invent an industry here, because I don't know, I'm not a guru by any means, but we don't have this for health.
Yeah.
Like, we don't have like the financial planner equivalency for health, but it's there. Like, it's in the industry. It's people like you, and
People should be worried about running out of health.
yeah,
as well.
people are more worried about running out of money than running out of health.
Absolutely.
Because I think we've taken a lot of time out of our lives, and we've definitely correlated financial uncertainty or money related stuff causing stress, or a lot of the factors that lower our like quality of life potentially,
And may limit someone's access to preventative care as well.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So I think I get on the like hierarchy of human needs, like how that like makes some sense.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, I feel like we've lost the plot a little bit, because I've heard some stories recently of like people, and they essentially, their health just drops way off the radar, and it's a surprise. And like, I understand absolutely that it's a surprise, but as someone in healthcare, I'm like, man, you could totally see that stuff coming, right? And I just think like a lot of people, they silo off their life so much, and they put health in this one bucket, that somehow all they need to do is like
Tap into it every once in a while.
eat some
Yeah.
vegetables, maybe go for some walks, and like or like play some pickup hockey or something like that, and then all of a sudden they can take that box and say like, I've done it.
Okay. Back
Whereas-
to the normal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and like there's such depth to the comprehensiveness that you can approach your own health. And I think that like when we're really talking about it, like, forget about weight loss, what we're really talking about, if we go a layer deeper, is like life
Yeah.
and like
quality of life.
living, and what does it mean to be alive, and like what are we really trying to do with all this stuff, because it's one thing for me to come in and have one of my teen athletes who's dealing with sport performance problems because they're weak or they're whatever, and or maybe someone a little older who needs to lose some weight, and so they're dealing with some confidence issues, and I've seen how it can affect their confidence. I've seen how that confidence can affect their career, how their career can affect their quality of life.
Yeah.
Like, I can't even tell you how
Their
many stories we
relationships.
have. I can't even tell you how many stories we have of people who are like 30 to 40 years old getting promotions because they've lost 30 pounds. Like, it's actually ridiculous how much that does for
Yeah.
people's confidence and quality of life and whatever. But I think if we take those people and we step them back at every phase of life with all the different value systems that correlate to those phases of life, you'll have them looking down the road and being like, hey, I'm gonna be saggy one day and decrepit, and I don't want to be as saggy or as decrepit, and I want to live long, and I want to play with grandkids, and I want to like do all those things. And I think that's so important. And I talk to my teens about this. Like, I talk to the kids playing sports in school. I say, like, you got to look down the road, because my arm, like, I played dodgeball last night in a sports league. My arm is torched. Like, it is brutal, because I played so much baseball as a young person. And I'm thinking, like, how am I gonna like Laura and I are thinking about like having kids like next year, and I'm looking forward at my potential career as a you know, T-ball coach, and I'm like, how am I supposed to teach these kids how to throw the ball?
Those poor kids.
When this poor kids are gonna have such bad throwing mechanics, and like it's because like there was no hindsight into how I was operating. It was just chuck fastballs, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I think on the level of my shoulder health that makes some sense, but on the level of my health, like viscerally, like on the whole, like I think a lot about like what I'm gonna be like when I'm 80.
That's actually how I got started in this journey, I guess. So in my grade 11 year, I was playing varsity football, and I was really looking for ways to improve my performance and really set myself apart. And so I started working with a nutritional coach, and you know, to my surprise, yeah, my performance was awesome that year, right? But more so than that, I just started feeling better. You know, I had these chronic digestive issues. Like I was a pretty constipated kid growing up, and so you know things like that started to resolve for the first time, and I knew what it felt like, you know, to have a normal stool, right? Whereas before I just thought that was my normal, and so. And that's what really started me into being so interested in health optimization.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for a lot of the kids watching out there, I think, you know, yeah, it can definitely take your athletic performance to a new level, but it can boost your confidence, and it can help your brain function. It can help you, you know, potentially achieve more in your educational goals. It can help you form stronger friendships and healthy relationships, because it just continues to spiral. Good things keep happening when you you know, you work on diet and lifestyle.
Man, that's so true. Like somehow, because I was fat as a kid, I also convinced myself I was dumb. Like how does that work? You know what I mean? Like I was fat. Did I go home and just like eat my face off? Like no, I just ate whatever was given to me. Like I didn't like really put much stock into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow, you know, kids start making fun of you. You start thinking you're different. You start like you're so distracted in the classroom, and then your grades aren't performing as well. And then like you're scared to put yourself out there. And now, you know, I'm fat and dumb, and not just fat.
Now you have a negative associated identity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like that's so huge with kids.
Absolutely.
And parents like I think parents get it, but I just think going back to like the stress conversation, like there's so much going on that like, and my parents had so much going on that I don't know that they could have stepped back, not in my earlier years, and said, hey, here's the gauntlet of what's going on right now. Because they just thought I was like cute and I was happy at home because I was comfortable at home.
Right.
But I wasn't comfortable at school, and often in sports I wasn't comfortable, and like I even got bullied by like coaches and stuff, and it wasn't like that bad, but it felt like the world to me to have a coach like even just nudge me a little bit like in the wrong way. And so I think sometimes taking a step back and having conversations about like your kids or like I think could make the world a difference. Like and but doing the same thing as a 50-year-old approaching a retirement and just saying like, hey, like what are the next 30, 35, 40, hopefully more.
How can I not run out of health?
Exactly.
Because if you run out of health, it doesn't matter that you didn't run out of money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen.
Oh, wow.